This is Ron Peters.
I'm John Nugent.
And I'm Sam Long.
Welcome to the After Class Podcast.
Because the best conversations happen
After class.
Thanks for joining us. Another episode of the After Class Podcast. We're glad to have you along. We are recording this one soon after our previous episode, so not a lot has happened since then. But we thought we'd bring you an update on our old man ailments, as we all have something going on with our bodies. I'll start. Last week during my over 40 soccer game, I tweaked my knee. So I don't know. There's some debate about whether it's a torn something or just a sprain. So we're going to wait a couple weeks and see how the swelling goes down and see how it goes.
Where you get the MRI kind of thing.
Yeah, right. So it's my first major injury, knee injury. I got one a couple years ago, but nothing happened, so I just kept living life. So I don't know. We'll see. Hopefully no surgery is needed, and my summer will be back to being fun, as right now it is not.
For me, I got a doctor's appointment tomorrow because I think that I have an ear infection. It's like I don't have like pain in my ear, but it just sounds, it's been muffled. Like my left ear, I'm hearing like muffled sounds. And I get like pain in the side of my face, like in my jaw, or like a little bit of a headache. And so my suspicion is some kind of an infection that's been bugging me for like 3 or 4 months, and I haven't done anything about it.
Smart. That can't go wrong.
I know, right? Can't get any worse from there.
Mm-hmm.
So I finally broke down, made a doctor's appointment to go check it out. And hopefully that's all it is. A little bit of antibiotic, and I might actually be feeling better. So we'll see how that goes. So that's my old man ailment.
Nothing new with me. I have my prolonged back problems since I was in my early 20s. But the cool thing is tomorrow I go to an appointment to find out if I'm eligible for a new experimental surgery, which if I am eligible and my problem is the one this procedure is meant to address, then I could have a better back than I've had in 20 years.
That would be fantastic.
So, I guess you can pray for the healing of knees and ears, and that I get good news tomorrow, like, oh, yeah, you are a poster child for this procedure, and you should look at 5 years of no back pain.
That would be great.
Okay.
And the cool thing about this procedure, it's called the Intracept procedure, if anyone wants to look into it. But it basically kills the nerves inside of your vertebrae if you have a problematic vertebrae, as opposed to dealing with all this stuff in the discs and around the vertebrae. This is a procedure that bores into it and kills the disc and kills the nerves. And if that's where your pain is coming from, then for 65% of the people who got this procedure, they went back to doing activities that they had to stop doing because of their back problem.
Wow.
So it would be conceivable that I could actually kick a soccer ball around.
Wow.
But I'll be happy if I can ride a bike, which is something I want to do with my grandchildren.
No doubt.
Teach them how to ride a bike, or at least ride a bike with them.
Well, I hope that that's the outcome for you, without a doubt.
And I like to be able to work out, especially to work out my core, which
yeah.
is something with a bad back. Every time I do anything to my core, it's like,
Right.
and then I'm down for 2 weeks. So yeah, we've got some health stuff going on. So you get to hear all of our scholarly talk. Now you get to hear our human frailties.
Which become more and more evident with each passing year. It's like right now I'm drinking my kombucha, which I know, Sam, you're drinking kombucha as well. Trying to make sure that, my gut is doing what it's supposed to, because I worry that I'm not getting the nutrients that I need. It's just all the things you start thinking about as you get older. It's like, what do I have to do to maintain some semblance of health? This is all part of it.
Yeah, not just brewing kombucha as well. So hopefully we're going to get a whole thing going in the near future with that.
Well, I love how you and I can compliment each other on this stuff, because I grow up.
I like you too. Oh, wait, is that not what we're doing?
Well, I mean, when you think about all the berries that I grow, to be able to flavor up your kombucha with my berries and bring it all together. And
so many possible innuendos.
I know. I'm thinking about the kinds of growing bushes and all that kind of stuff.
So we're going to continue our series through the Apocrypha.
John. Appreciate that.
And today we're actually going to go through the book of Tobit, which at the end of last episode I awkwardly suggested you read.
Yeah, if you didn't listen all the way to the end last time, John had a brain meltdown.
I was trying to say too many things at the same time, and chaos poured out of my mouth. Yeah, it was funny.
He said after clock, just to be clear. He said after clock.
Clock.
Another joy of getting older. Just point that out. If our readers care about all the things that happen when you get older, part of it is you can't speak anymore, which we get paid to do.
Mm-hmm. Words. Okay. So the neat thing about Tobit, if you have a copy of the NRSV that includes the Apocrypha. It'll be the first book you encounter.
Yeah, conveniently.
It's kind of how it kicks off. Now, we started with the additions to Daniel and the additions to Esther because that's more familiar. Start
Right.
with the familiar, gain your trust that these are not heretical books that will hurt your faith. And then, but this is a standalone story. It's not addition to anything. It's its own story, free floating, in the same way that kind of like the Book of Ruth is a free floating short story. The Book of Jonah, the Book of Esther, kind of standalone stories with a coherent plot from beginning to end. And it's a really cool story. And
it is a
just
good
to
story.
give some context, the Book of Tobit is located, situated back in the time of the Assyrian Empire. So this is when the Assyrians are the ones who defeated the northern kingdom and tried to defeat the southern kingdom as well, and really subdued most of the southern kingdom. But in 701, there was a miraculous deliverance of Hezekiah prayed, and
Right.
God smote the Assyrian army, and Sennacherib and his minions had to go up north to deal with issues elsewhere.
One of the best lines in the Bibles. And in the morning they looked, and there were all the dead bodies. So that's
Right.
a line right from the Bible, which is great.
So this is situated after that. And so when Assyria came into the northern kingdom, it scattered. We often think of like exile and people when the Babylonians came, but there was an earlier exile that the Assyrians did that basically scattered Israelites from the northern 10 tribes. And so Tobit and his family were part of that scattering, and they ended up landing in the city of Nineveh, where they made their lifestyle. And really the whole, even though Tobit had a life back in the land where he brags about being very loyal and faithful and following all the festivals and going to Jerusalem as people should, but he made his livelihood eventually in the land of Nineveh, which is the capital of Assyria. And he made his livelihood through, working for the king and doing trade deals and, moving money and product around. And so he ended up leaving a bunch of money in Persia or Media, which is further to the east.
Right.
Right. And so the centers of this story are Nineveh, in the capital of Syria, and Ecbatana, which is a city in Media, which is to the east of Babylon,
Right.
which eventually ended up merging with the Persians to become the Medo-Persian Empire.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's just to give some, I guess, geographical and historical parameters for where the story is held. Someone want to take it from there?
With background or starting to read?
Oh, if there's any more background we need. Great.
Like I was telling you guys before, this is one of my lower. I don't know this one as well as many of the others, so I got nothing to add.
Well, I think that the way it starts off is it establishes his character, Tobit's character. Even before he was taken into exile, Tobit references the fact that they went into exile because of like their idolatry, unfaithfulness to God. But I wasn't like those people. He was the one who observed all the festivals. As you already said, John, he's the one who actually went to Jerusalem to offer up the sacrifices in the one place that God authorized those sacrifices to be made. And so he starts out by just citing the fact that I was a righteous man, but my righteousness didn't prevent me from being caught up in, God's judgment upon his people.
I think the other thing I would add is it's kind of unique from things we've encountered in the Bible, but it does like have some like semblance of other things. It's like it brings in kinds of different stories that sound familiar, but not just one.
Right.
And so in that way, it's kind of unique as you go through it. Some different court tales. You got a little Job action. It's just kind of it's just kind of a hodgepodge.
Right.
And one last kind of introductory thing is, it's odd. Like the first 2 chapters are told in the first person, and it's Tobit speaking.
Right.
So it just begins like, I, Tobit, and here's what happened to me, and here's what I said, and here's how I responded, and this is what I prayed. And then it switches to the third person for the rest of the book.
Yeah.
It doesn't really go back to that first person the way the story started, which is kind of interesting. You
Good
would think that
observation,
maybe, the narrator picks up in the middle, and then Tobit would finish at the end. So literarily, there's a little bit of disjointedness here.
Yeah.
Although story-wise, it's very tight.
Oh, yeah, without a doubt.
It's very tight and enjoyable story. Toit.
Tweet,
Tweet.
tweet.
The Toy Story.
So we're going to pick up in our reading. This is a book we're not going to be able to read all
Yeah,
of it
it's
like
11,
we
12
have
chapters. Yeah,
the additions to Daniel. But Ron already kind of talked about how Tobit was a righteous man when he used to live in the northern kingdom,
Yep.
in the land of Naphtali, I believe.
Yeah.
And then he moved to Nineveh. He was actually taken captive, and in that, and made his livelihood there. And he, in Nineveh, still lived a righteous life. And this is where we're going to pick up with his kind of description of the righteous life he lived in Nineveh, which is an account of how a person lives a righteous life in exile,
Yeah.
which has been a theme so far of all the intertestamental books.
right.
The Israelites are in exile. What is God doing there? How do God's people act when they're in exile? And so Sam's going to...
Yeah, we're starting in chapter 1 in verse 10. It says, "After I was carried away captive to Assyria and came as a captive to Nineveh, every one of my kindred and my people ate the food of the Gentiles. But I kept myself from eating the food of the Gentiles, because I was mindful of God with all my heart. The Most High gave me favor and good standing with Shalmaneser, and I used to buy everything he needed. Until his death, I used to go into Media and buy for him there. While in the country Media, I left bags of silver worth 10 talents in trust with Gabael, the brother of Gabri. But when Shalmaneser died and his son Sennacherib reigned in his place, the highways in Media became unsafe, and I could no longer go there. In the days of Shalmaneser, I performed many acts of charity to my kindred, those of my tribe. I would give my food to the hungry and my clothing to the naked, and if I saw the dead body of any of my people thrown out behind the wall of Nineveh, I would bury it. I also buried any whom King Sennacherib put to death when he came fleeing from Judea in those days of judgment that the King of Heaven executed upon him because of his blasphemies. For in his anger he put to death many Israelites, but I would secretly remove the bodies and bury them. So when Sennacherib looked for them, he could not find them. Then one of the Ninevites went and informed the king about me, that I was burying them, so I hid myself. But when I realized that the king knew about me, and that I was being searched for to be put away to death, I was afraid and ran away. Then all my property was confiscated. Nothing was left to me that was not taken into the royal treasury except my wife Anna and my son Tobias." So it just kind of gives the background that it reminds me a little bit of the Moses story. Like he's doing these things, like he's for his people, and then the king finds out and he's got to run to save his life, and kind of loses everything. And so these descriptions of him as being a very pious, if not humble, person. Where he just he does what he's supposed to do, and it's kind of challenging everyone else who's not. They're eating the food of the Gentiles. They're doing these things, and it's interesting. He doesn't eat the food of the Gentiles, but he buys all the food for the king, for a Gentile king.
Yeah.
And so it's
Gentiles can eat it all they want.
Yeah,
That's not a problem for the Jews.
Right. Yeah.
And so he, like you said, he's modeling an interesting way of living in exile in a place that's not his own. He's not going to follow their customs, but he's not going to decry their customs. In fact, will actually enable them at some level.
It is interesting to me. When you look at his acts of piety, the things that really stand out is his... It's not in the passage you read, but almsgiving. He was a dude who always took care of the poor. When he's having a feast or a festival, he was always sending his son, go find me some poor person that we can share our blessings with them. He was always keen to observe proper worship in Jerusalem when that was accessible. And there's a passing reference to the food. He didn't eat the food, and that becomes a big deal in the post-exilic period.
Yeah.
Gentile food, especially unclean food. But the thing that really stands out in this book is his insistence of finding dead Jews who are left out and exposed and burying them when no one's looking.
Yeah, that stood out to me too. It's like all the other things make sense, but why do you want to make sure that Jews are properly buried? And we don't get an explanation for it. It'd be nice if, somewhere in Tobit, he said, I did it because of this, whatever the hope is. And I wondered, this is me speculating, maybe you guys know more that you can either affirm or deny, but I wonder if it has to do with their understanding of, life after death. That, there's still this time period of, death is Hades or Sheol or whatever.
Yep.
And you want to make sure that your dead Jewish brothers and sisters at least get rest when they die. They're not anticipating heaven or anything like that, but by properly burying them, their souls can at least lie in peace. Versus if they're left out there exposed, maybe their, spirit, soul, whatever, is not going to find peace. Is going to wander the earth or whatever. I can see that as an act of kindness towards his Jewish brothers and sisters being motivated by that kind of a thing. Agree, disagree? Is that on the right track?
Yeah, I was thinking along similar lines. I thought of two reasons, and I think one of them is related to what you're talking about. One is just a statement about the sanctity of life.
Mm-hmm.
Like, life is important, blood is important, death is a big deal.
Yeah.
Gentiles, carelessly throw bodies out to shame and disgrace them.
Yeah.
But Jews have a high view of the sanctity of life. And the second one, and so that's kind of could be related to afterlife. Like, to live a good life, there's a proper way to die and be buried. And it was always important that people were properly buried. Often it was buried back in the land.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
Like
exactly.
Joseph and Jacob really wanted their bones to be taken back to the land to be buried where Abraham was. Interestingly, that's not a value here.
Right. Yeah.
Um,
Just get them
if
underground.
you can't be buried in the land, and it may be a shift in values. And now that they're in exile, like, this is their soil, this is their land, this is where they're buried. But if they can't be buried in their own land, at least they can be buried in an honorable way.
Mm-hmm.
But the other thing that stuck out to me is this book is very much about Tobit taking care of his own people.
Yeah.
Like, maintaining your loyalty to fellow Jews in exile. There's not talk about his charity and alms given to his Ninevite neighbors.
Yeah.
Nor him going around getting everybody that's been laying out in the streets. It's specifically, his charity specifically focuses on fellow Jews.
Yeah.
Yeah, one thing I would add is there's definitely a tradition or a desire to not leave the dead out for various reasons. So I think of like Deuteronomy 21, where it talks about the person who has been convicted and then put to death because of a sin is then in addition hung on a tree
Mm-hmm.
as a further sort of embarrassment. But then it does say don't leave them overnight. And so I think from passages like that, I think there grew a tradition of not leaving anyone, whether they're capital punishment or not, out. And it could lead into reasons like you're talking about, but that definitely was an important part of the way they cared for their people when they died.
And I like that because it does take it back to Torah and God's own instructions, and for Israel to revere that. And so with that Torah connection, it just, again, it reinforces the kind of righteousness that Tobit has, that even with regard to the dead, I'm listening to God's instructions and making sure that I'm applying them. I mean, it could be all the things that we've talked about sort of circling together.
It's interesting how this evolves for the Christians. Like, they're known for, like, rescuing babies that have been left in the streets.
Yeah.
And here, my understanding is not just Christian babies. I mean, any baby that's left in the street is something that the Christians wanted to take care of.
Yeah.
So there may be some evolution into kind of branching out more into concern for Gentiles, because the Gentile mission has begun.
Yep.
And these babies can become Christians.
Right.
Yeah.
Being adopted into Christian families.
Yeah, and just a couple things that kind of come to my mind in terms of how we see this in the New Testament. Again, it's this emphasis on being different. The food thing is also how you distinguish Jew and Gentile. Like, when you get to the New Testament, like, why are food laws such a big deal? Well, you see that emerge in the intertestamental literature. And this just becomes a major marker for how Jews know that they are separate from the Gentiles. And so books like this kind of help reinforce that. In addition, just the idea of giving alms, especially like in Luke Acts, giving alms is a major marker of the people of God. It's like this big sign. And it's not something that just appeared out of nowhere. That in Tobit, which was written long before the New Testament era, you already have this ethic of giving alms, especially to your fellow Jewish brothers and sisters. And so it's like little things like that you see in the New Testament, you begin to realize that this is part of an ethic that the Jews were practicing long before Jesus came along. And so it's not new, but rather being reinforced as a marker of people who are part of God's kingdom.
Yeah. It reminds you of that true religion passage in James. Right?
Oh, right.
Look after widows and orphans near distress, keep unstained from the world.
Yeah.
And there's definitely a keep separate, unstained from the Gentiles in your eating practice, and other forms of mixing, but take care of those poor people.
Yep, without a doubt.
Yep. So this is his kind of introduction. I'm a great guy.
In case you didn't know.
Look at me, I'm great.
And humble.
But his story takes a dark turn.
Weirdly dark.
Yeah.
One good thing happens before it turns dark, and that is, Sennacherib dies. He's replaced by another king, and then a relative of Tobit basically comes to do for the new king what Tobit used to do. So he had favor Ahikar, and there are legends about Ahikar in other pseudepigraphal works. But he gains favor with the king, and so Tobit can come out of hiding.
Yeah.
And then return to his home in Nineveh, where he resumes his loving, almsgiving ways.
Right.
Yep.
And then something heinous happens.
So, picking up chapter 2 of Tobit, begin verse 7. Tobit is continuing his practice of burying his fellow Jews who were dead. When the sun had set, I went and dug a grave and buried him. And my neighbors laughed and said, "Is he still not afraid? He has already been hunted down to be put to death for doing this." And he ran away. Yet here he is again, burying the dead. That same night I washed myself and went into my courtyard and lay down by the wall of the courtyard. My face was uncovered because of the heat. I did not know that there were sparrows on the wall. Their fresh droppings fell into my eyes and produced white films. I went to the physicians to be healed, but the more they treated me with ointments, the more my vision was obscured by the white films, until I became completely blind. For 4 years I remained unable to see. All my kindred were sorry for me, and Ahikar, man, am I saying that right? Ahikar took care of me for 2 years before he went to Elimas. Man, I'm not saying my word. Elemaeus, thank you. I knew I was not saying that right. I was probably trying to go Greek on that, and it was screwing me up.
Talk about practicing medicine.
Oh, my gosh. White film. It's like bird poop is
So
white.
first he just couldn't see. There's a film on his eyes, but he can kind of maybe see through it blurry.
Maybe wash it out.
And then the doctor, he went to the doctor. Hey, can you make this blur go away? Sure.
Here, put on this ointment.
Try,
Try the snake oil.
Try this, try that.
And apparently they took him from being partially blind to fully blind.
I hope these are not the kind of doctors that are going to work on your back, John.
Yeah, or your ears.
Exactly. Oh, man. Yeah, I don't want to
I've
get
had an
worse.
infection. Here, let me work on that. Shoot, I can't hear now.
Yeah, and it hurts way worse than it did before. But this is a major part of the story. I mean, for him to be blind is significant for the way the rest of the story is going to unfold. We kind of laugh at it because it sounds very funny to a modern reader. But I think to the ancient world, his blindness is the major part of it. And finding a resolution to his blindness is a major plot point now going forward.
And this scene is part of why I'd love to see this turned into a movie. This is old
Really?
guy sitting by a wall, and there are birds. Chirp, 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 chirp.
Plot.
And now he's blind.
You know what? I strongly suspect that if somebody made this into a movie, they would come up with a different way for his blindness. As much as we would want to see it.
You can't.
I know, but I think that they would I think a movie producer would be like, that's just too silly and stupid.
What would happen is a bird would poop on his head, and he'd sort of run and stumble to try to put water to wash it off, but the water that he'd throw in his eyes would be infected with some sort of parasite.
Hey,
Yeah, there you go.
yeah. You'd have to come up with something more believable.
You're welcome.
Exactly.
Yeah, well.
Sorry,
This is key for setting up the plot.
Yes.
And his whole life kind of takes a turn. Like, he can't help people anymore. He starts to rue his own existence. He gets cranky. His wife has to, step up and make some money, and he accuses her of getting money illegitimately.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
she's like,
Ill-gotten gains.
Where's my great husband that everyone loved for being so charitable? Now he's talking trash to his wife that's just trying to help make ends meet. And so he prayed, and this is a key thing. He prays a prayer to God saying, kill me now. Life is awful. I didn't do anything to deserve this. Yeah, Israel has sinned, and I have my role, but this is over the edge, and take me now. And it reminds you of Jonah. It is better for me to die than to keep on living this way.
Yeah. It's got a little bit of Job in there.
Yeah,
too.
for me, it's a Job Jonah combo.
Yeah.
You got the wife, and you got the life sucks, and you got the Jonah everything's the worst. I need to die. Yeah, and it's kind of a weird combo of those.
Can you say that again? I like the
No,
tone of voice
I'm
you
good.
use on that. It was more the tone
After
than the words.
clock.
Off the clock. So yeah, this is where Tobit's account ends. It's in the middle. The prayer is actually in chapter 3. The first half of the chapter is kind of where the Tobit first person account ends. And so you have scene 1 ends.
Yep.
And we transition to scene 2. Meanwhile, on the
back
other
at
side of the
ranch.
world, and I'll be reading from chapter 3, beginning in verse 7. On the same day,
As the prayer of my, I can't see, I want to die. Yep.
yeah, good point. On the same day at Ecbatana in Media, it also happened that Sarah, the daughter of Raguel, was reproached by one of her father's female slaves, for she had been married to 7 husbands, and the wicked demon Asmodeus had killed each of them before they had been with her, as is the customary for wives. So the female slave said to her, You are the one who kills your husbands. See, you have already been married to 7 husbands and have not borne the name of a single one of them. Why do you beat us? Because your husbands are dead. Go with them. May we never see a son or daughter of yours.
That's so
Ouch.
good. I mean, well,
Ouch.
not good. but,
Harsh.
Like, yes.
No kidding.
I did notice that it says, You're the one who kills your husbands. It says, other authorities read strangles. So she goes beyond.
Oh.
Like, I don't know.
You choke them on the
I guess.
the marriage bed.
Yeah. Well, and here, like they get married, they go through the wedding ceremony, but before they can consummate the marriage, the man dies. And it's like you can almost see this happening 1 or 2 times where, one guy dies, another guy wants to marry her and he dies. But I would think, especially after 3 or 4, I can't imagine that this would happen again. I think that all the men in the neighborhood would be like, no, thanks.
Good.
I'll find somebody else. 7 times seems kind of excessive to me.
Yeah, and so we're given insight as readers,
Yeah.
from the narrator, that this is because of a demon.
Yep.
Asmodeus,
Asmodeus.
which is not a Jewish word.
It sounds like Mozart to me.
Yeah, right.
Rock me Amadeus.
Yep. And it's very much like a Persian name. It kind of reminds you also of like Ahura Mazda, like one of the
right.
Persian gods.
Yep.
And so there's a Persian sounding demon name
Okay.
in the region of Media, which is adjacent to Persia and eventually unites with Persia, that apparently kills them on the wedding night. We're not told why, but
He's a demon. Does he need a reason?
yeah. And then this kind of demonology is really unparalleled in Jewish literature up to this point. Like there are like talks about like goat demons, right, in the
Sure.
wilderness, and then maybe spirits of the deceased that kind of get raised, or like dead people kind of stuff in Sheol. But you don't have much demon possession.
Yeah.
Up until this point, I mean, it shows up big time in the New Testament. But even in the New Testament where it shows up, you don't get anything like this, where a
Yeah.
demon is like killing people.
Right.
That's unprecedented in the whole Bible.
But it is present in other literature.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's almost like it's a folk, it's like a kind of a typical trope that other cultures write stories about that now the Jews are writing their own stories about. I don't know. But it is weird, like this demon, they said the demonology that doesn't exist. It's that like demons in general in the Old Testament don't really exist. There's evil spirits
No,
from God.
That's right.
Right? But there's no demons.
Yeah.
And like here now it's like, oh, okay, we got this thing that's just killing killing men, killing husbands.
Well, and in Greek mythology, demons are they're like lesser gods, like demigods. The word daimon is often used for these sort of second-class gods, and they're not necessarily evil or possessing people or whatever. It's just that term. But I can almost see where Jews would take that term and apply it to these sort of horrific, spirits that cause, horrible things to happen to people. It's like their commentary on the Greek or other foreign pantheons. It's like, no, they're not good gods. They just wreck your life.
Yeah. And this story, this kind of demonology doesn't really fit in. Like there's no other Jewish literature from the Second Temple literature that describes demons as functioning this way or being like this. There's no Old Testament precedent. The New Testament doesn't seem to like pick up where this leaves off.
Right.
Instead, it transitions to possession,
Mhm.
and it's associated with illness and not necessarily death.
Right.
Well, not at all with death.
Right.
Killing people, just maiming them, making them ill, possessing them, ruining their lives.
Yeah.
But not anything like this. So it seems to be a one-off, and it's a story that is fiction.
Right.
It's kind of historical fiction in the sense it's kind of tapping into a real time period, and it may be just a reflection of, when Jews are on Persian soil, they encounter Persian problems,
Right. Yeah.
right? And so there's a little bit of merging the world of Persia with its kind of view of the divine is very dualistic.
Mm.
They have the all good God and the all evil God. And so maybe they have all good spirits and all evil spirits, but it's kind of a very balanced, dualistic,
Mm.
almost what we would call closer to spiritual warfare of Christian fiction
Right. Yeah.
than it is the kind of spiritual warfare you find in the New Testament.
Yeah.
So it's just a strange one-off thing. It's hard to locate it in a trajectory that the New Testament goes to, or even early Christian history. Like this
Yeah.
kind of demonology is a one-off.
Yeah.
And like you said, there may be parallels in other literature and cultures, but the Judeo-Christian tradition doesn't really do anything with this.
Right. I thought I found a great parallel, then I realized it was wrong. So, so the 7 husbands, right? I thought of the Samaritan woman. I thought it was like when he says, "Yeah,
Yeah.
you've had X number of husbands, and the one you have is not, it's 5."
Yeah.
I don't know. Has anything been written comparing those? Do you know of like this?
I've not seen anything comparing them. This is really loose. But when Jesus is asked about, the woman who was married to 7 brothers, at the resurrection, who will be her husband, kind of, it's similar, but
Yeah.
it's super loose. I don't know if there's really any dependency there.
She had bad luck too,
I was saying
Clearly had bad luck.
it'd be funny if the Samaritan woman was a pariah, not because she's promiscuous, but because she's a husband killer.
right?
That'd be a whole different interpretation of that story. But
Big time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So meanwhile, this innocent woman who hasn't done anything wrong is catching flack from her servants, whom she may be taking her frustration out on.
It's fair.
Because they're
Could
like,
be.
why
Like,
are you,
don't beat us.
Why
Yeah.
are you beating us? You're the husband killer.
Right.
So we don't get what she's doing to them, but obviously she's lashing out on them the way Tobit lashes out against his wife.
Mhm.
Like, so things are getting tense at home
Yeah.
because of
both
this
places.
thing that, they didn't do anything to deserve. So she does the same thing as Tobit, which is calls upon God and says, "Why are you letting this happen to me? My life's terrible.
Mhm.
Take me now."
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
it's better for me to die than to keep on living this way.
And as soon as she finishes her prayer, starting in verse 16 of chapter 3, at that very moment, the prayers of both of them were heard in the glorious presence of God. So Raphael was sent to heal both of them, Tobit by removing the white films from his eyes so that he might see God's light with his eyes, and Sarah, daughter of Raguel, by giving her in marriage to Tobias, son of Tobit, and by setting her free from the wicked demon. I would pronounce it Asmodeus, but Asmodeus, is that what you said? Yeah.
Whatever.
For Tobias was entitled to have her before all others who had desired to marry her. At the same time that Tobit returned from the courtyard from his house, Sarah, daughter of Raguel, came down from her upper room. And so God's going to set plans in motion to do both at one time
Yeah.
through this Raphael person. Well, not person. We'll find out what Raphael is. But he's going to intertwine their fates.
Yeah.
Right? This is making of a Hallmark movie.
Yeah.
I mean, if
yeah.
you're talking about a movie, a Hallmark movie would be the way to go.
Yeah. There you
The
go.
coincidences are too crazy for it to happen, but here we are.
Only God could orchestrate
Only
something like
God
this.
knows.
Yeah.
And this is a strange passage to me because it just forecasts the whole plot of the book.
Yeah, that's what happens
Right.
the rest of the book.
Like, that's it. This is table of contents.
Yeah, there's
There-
no narrative tension. We know where the story's going now.
Yeah. And yet still, it's an entertaining read.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, it's a feature of good storytelling that you can know what's coming, and yet you're still kind of entertained and delighted by how it all unfurls.
We know. Yeah.
Unlike this podcast.
Well, we know how the story is supposed to end, but we want to know how we get there. It's like, well, how is Tobit going to be healed? How is Sarah going to be delivered from this horrible demon? Like, tell us the story so we know the end, but we want to know the path to get to the end.
You can see like a dad or granddad reading this, to the young grandchildren. How does it happen? Well, that's where the story ends. Wait, no, tell me more.
Tell me more. Tell me more.
And so, just it's also part of the fiction of it. Raphael means God heals, and of course, that's exactly what Raphael is going to do.
Oh, right.
Heal not only the eyes, but the life and soul of this poor Sarah. Or I don't know, whatever.
Well said, Sam.
I don't know. It's bad.
Yeah, and that's what we see in intertestamental literature is that angels are given names, which you didn't see that a lot in the
Nope.
Old Testament. Only the book of Daniel,
Yep.
right, has that. And this is quite possibly written before Daniel, even.
Yeah.
And so this may be the first book. Well, the Enoch literature, depending on when you date that, maybe. So it's right around this time that angels start receiving names.
Right.
And their names are simply an expression of their function.
Right.
Yeah.
So this is the healing angel,
Yeah.
the healer of God or something like that, right?
Well, but you've already kind of touched on it, John. Like this takes me like to the book of Hebrews. Like, why does the author of Hebrews make this argument at the beginning of the book that Jesus is superior to angels? It's like, what's the big deal? Well, a book like this begins to show us that for Jews, somewhere in this intertestamental period, angels started playing a bigger role in the way they understood the world. God sending angels, or like with Enoch, the punishment of the bad angels. But angelology really grows, and you see it in the intertestamental literature. You see it a little bit in the Old Testament, but it's the intertestamental literature where it gets really big. And so once you become familiar with all those different instances, you can kind of see why the author of Hebrews would say Jesus is superior to angels, because there's just this whole world of angelology that permeates all of Jewish, thought and discourse and everything.
Yeah, especially in the Enoch literature. There's more angels there than anywhere else.
Oh, yeah.
So, and this kind of angel, a messenger who goes down and does things among humans, we see that in the Old Testament. But this is evolving in terms of the language and specific functions and duties. Well, we're going to skip a chunk. So basically, we're told what's going to happen in the book. And so the next thing that happens is that Tobit tells his son, hey, I left a bunch of money out. So they're in Nineveh, Assyria. I left about a bunch of money out east. It's kind of your inheritance. Go get it. I have a friend there, and go make the trip. And it's a perilous journey, and the roads are not entirely safe. And so his son Tobias is like, all right, but I'm going to need some help. I don't know the way. This is not my jam. She's like, all right, go find someone. So he goes to look for someone, and predictably, he runs into
Raphael, yeah,
whom he perceives to be a man.
Yep, just a guy.
So he is revealing himself as a man, and Raphael says, hey, we're cousins, and I'm related to you.
Hey, cuz.
And he's like, all right, you'd be a good guide. You know the way. He takes him back to Dad, and Dad's like, I approve. He's got good bloodline. I'll give you X amount of money if you can get my son back safe with all the money. And so they depart on the journey with the dog.
I was about to mention. Don't they pick up a dog at some point?
This is weird, the dog theme in this book. The dog shows up twice. Once at the very beginning of the journey, and the dog goes with him, and once at the end of the journey on the way home, and the dog goes with him.
It's Holy Spirit.
Yeah, and it just, nothing is said about it.
It doesn't do anything.
In such a tightly written story where everything and every name and every function has a purpose, and and it all unfolds just perfectly. Nothing of significance happens with the dog.
Yeah, like there's this old saying in writing short stories that if at some point in the story you mention a gun, somewhere that gun has to go off. Like you don't put anything in the story that isn't somehow germane to the story. And so for the dog to show up and then have no role in the unfolding of the story is really weird.
And I could think of some purposes the dog could have served, but we'll get to that later. But the dog doesn't serve any purpose. And this is where, to me, this kind of teaches us a lesson about ancient Jewish writings. Like certain people will develop, what are the criteria that an ancient book is historical, right? And they'll make this list of criteria. If it's historical, to use real place names. If it's historical, it will have incidental details that don't mean anything to the plot. And they're only telling it because that's what happened.
Right.
Yeah.
But if you were writing a story as a fiction, you wouldn't have details that are not required.
Right.
Right? Except that's exactly what Tobit does.
Exactly.
It has details that are totally irrelevant to the unfolding of the plot. And we don't say, oh, wow, based on the criteria given to me by Josh McDowell, this must be a historical book. You know what I'm saying? This is why I think it's helpful to read some non-canonical Jewish works to see that there are some literary conventions that defy modern assumptions about history and non-history.
Yeah. Fair enough. We're running out of time here.
So they go on a journey.
Yep.
The dog is with them. And along the way, well, where do we want to?
6:1.
Yep. Chapter
You can do
6. And I can just summarize it real quick because we are running out of time here. But in chapter 6, on the way there, they come to a river and their tigers.
scene.
Yeah. And Tobias goes fishing, and this fish jumps up and tries to swallow his foot, which is kind
Big
of
old catfish.
That's a
apparently.
big,
Mhm.
big fish. And the angel says, "Get it, grab the fish." And so he gets the fish and hauls it in, and he takes out its gall, its heart, and its liver. Throw away the intestines, basically throw away everything else. But make sure you have these three things because you're going to need them down the road. And so these, fish guts basically play a role in the deliverance of both Sarah and his dad, Tobit.
It reminds me of a video game where you pick up these items along the way. And
Oh,
they're
yeah.
kind of unrelated. Then at the end, like, oh, I guess I do need those.
Now I know why I need those.
Yep. And again, it's forecasted.
Yeah.
Yep.
Right. So Tobias is like, so what exactly do I need these parts for? And then the angel says, beginning in verse 8, well, as for the fish's heart and liver, you must burn them to make a smoke in the presence of a man or woman afflicted by a demon or an evil spirit. And every affliction will flee away and never remain with that person any longer.
Yeah.
Right. Now he hasn't met Sarah yet and doesn't know that she has a demon. So, yeah, you, the reader, do know that.
And then as for the gall in verse 9, anoint a person's eyes where white films have appeared on them.
Know anyone like that?
Blow upon them, upon the white films, and the eyes will be healed.
Yeah. So if you ever, know anyone, Tobias, that might have that, infirmity, you could do that.
Yeah. And he's met Tobit.
Yeah.
So I guess Tobias would be like, oh, I have a use for this. I don't know
Right.
about this demon fleeing thing, but I can help with that.
Right.
So their journey continues, and along the way, they're kind of making their way across to Ecbatana, and Raphael says, hey, you've got a cousin nearby.
How about that?
Let's stop at their house because they have a daughter, and, while we're on this trip, why don't we find a wife for you? And so he's like, okay, and they go to the house of Raguel, and he's like, hey, I'm a near relative. It's like, hey, according to Torah, we could get married. and so as the story
Been
goes,
married 7 times.
yeah, as the story goes, they agree to the marriage, and there's some warning about the demons, right?
Mhm.
But he's like, no problem, because he knows he has these fish parts, right? And so, whose turn is it? It's my turn to read from chapter 8.
Go
Yeah.
for it.
So they decide to get married. They throw a party, and then the wedding night comes. So chapter 8, verse 1, when they had finished eating and drinking, they wanted to retire. And so they took the young man and brought him into the bedroom. Then Tobias remembered the words of Raphael, and he took the fish's liver and heart out of the bag where he had them and put them on the embers of the incense. The odor of the fish so repelled the demon that he fled to the remotest parts of Egypt. But Raphael followed him and at once bound him there, hand and foot. So it worked. The fish guts being burned like incense dispelled the demon. And to make sure he never comes back again, Raphael binds him to the ground in Egypt.
Right. Well, we were talking about before how this section is called Tobias routs the demon. I don't think he didn't rout anybody.
No.
He had stinky fish guts on fire, and I feel like Raphael did the most of the routing, but nonetheless.
Yeah, most people don't want you to nuke fish in a microwave because of bad smell, but
Much less.
evidently there's a good purpose for that, getting rid of demons.
Yeah. And one of the funny parts of the story is, we know, as the readers, this is happening, that the demon's no longer a problem. But mom and dad don't know.
Right.
No.
So if you go down to verse 9, the parents, who just prayed for their daughter and their new son-in-law, like, God, please spare them. But it says, then they went to sleep for the night. They went to sleep for the night. But Raguel rose. So, he laid down. It's like, I got to do something about this. And so he called his servants to him, and they went and dug a grave.
Yes.
For he said, it is possible that he will die, and we will become an object of ridicule and derision. And so they dug a grave for this guy, who they expect to be dead like all the other men.
Right.
Yeah, I didn't think 8 was a charm. Yeah,
Right.
Which it is hilarious that they're like, yeah, we're assuming that he's gonna die, so let's just get everything ready for that. Not allowing their daughter to marry.
I know,
Just
right?
Like, we're gonna give it one more shot, but we don't think it's gonna go very well.
Yeah.
And then for the sake of time, we'll speed up how the story ends. You'll have to read all the details for yourself. But they wake up the next morning. Everyone's alive. Everyone's happy. They're partying. They're feasting. Meanwhile, Raphael goes to what is the city?
Ekbatana.
Ecbatana,
Mm-hmm.
fetches. He goes to get the money
Yes.
that they left to go get, except the man who has the money wants to go back to the wedding party. And so he gets new guests for the party. He gets the money. They celebrate. Of course, like a good person from up north, the parents don't want to let the daughter go. They want to keep the
Right.
party going. Kind of little Laban echoes.
Right.
But they're like, no, we got to get home. Mom and
Yeah.
dad are worried. And so he takes his daughter, takes a bunch of money, and heads back to Nineveh to meet mom and dad. Who wants to pick up the story from there?
Me, 11. Then Anna ran up to her son and threw her arms around him, saying, "Now that I've seen you, my child, I am ready to die." And she wept. Then Tobit got up and came stumbling out through the courtyard door. Tobias went up to him. With the gall of the fish in his hand, holding him firmly, he blew into his eyes, saying, "Take courage, father." With this, he applied the medicine on his eyes, and it made him smart. Next, with both his hands, he peeled off the white films from the corners of his eyes. Then Tobit saw his son and threw his arms around him, and he wept and said to him, "I see you, my son, the light of my eyes." And he said, "Blessed be God, blessed be his great name, blessed be all the holy angels. May his holy name be blessed throughout all the ages. Though he afflicted me, now he has had mercy upon me. Now I see my son Tobias." And they all praised and thanked God and, celebrated the
And there was
marriage
great
and all this,
rejoicing.
and everything ended happily ever after.
Yep.
They go to pay the angel. I think this is interesting. Raphael goes to get paid off, and Tobit's kind of feeling generous. I tell you what, you get half of everything you came back
Which
with,
is a lot.
except half of Sarah. You don't get her, but you can have half the money.
Right.
It's very generous payment because he's thrilled. This story couldn't have ended better for Tobit. And then Raphael reveals himself. And by the way, Raphael introduced himself as Azariah, which
Yeah.
means Yahweh is a helper or my helper, right?
Okay.
So the word for help. And so he even uses symbolic names when he's introducing himself as a human. But he reveals himself to be an angel, and everyone's like, "Oh, that's sick! I get to keep all the money."
Yeah.
And then basically, they get old, and then there's like final blessings from Tobit to Tobias. And again, as he's blessing him, he's giving him instructions about almsgiving and like taking care of your
Being a good
Jewish,
Jew. Yeah.
being a good Jew.
Sounds like Jacob at the end of Genesis.
Total thanksgiving, praise, final lessons to his son, and then we talk about Tobit and Anna dying of a ripe age, and then bad things happening to Nineveh.
Amen.
The destruction of Nineveh is anticipated, and he says to Tobias, "Get out of here. Bad things are going to happen in this town. Go be with the in-laws." And so Sarah and Tobias go with the in-laws, and they live happily ever after.
Yep.
Yeah. So that's the story of Tobit.
Yeah. It's a great story. It's just so much fun. There are a lot of interesting parts. It kind of makes you smile at moments. There's some hilarious moments. And so if you haven't read it, go read it because it's a great story.
What do y'all think would be the impetus, the point to someone writing this and call it the 200s?
Yeah, roughly.
I think it's another primer for how to live life in exile.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Yeah, and God still cares for his people. It takes it to a new level with angels and demons and all that. And so you get a little bit more kind of behind the scenes, into what we might call, spirit realm or whatever, for lack of a better term. But it shows more of God's concern that, God sends his angels to help his people. It's not just these oppressive empires, but there's even oppressive demons out there, but God has power over them as well. And so, yeah, it just shows God's concern for his people, especially for the righteous. And even though they are going to go through hard times, okay, Tobit and Sarah both go through very difficult times, God doesn't forget them, and he eventually delivers them from these horrible situations.
And to me, it's important, when Nineveh is going to be destroyed, it's not go back to Jerusalem. It's go further east.
Go further away, yeah.
away.
Yeah.
And that's where you're going to have your livelihood. So to me, there's a little bit of an apologetic for embrace exilic living.
Yeah.
Which is just such a testament to how Jews were thinking during this time period, because people always assume, when they misread the Bible and the teachings about Jerusalem, that it was all about getting back to Jerusalem. And it just wasn't. And these books testify to there are plenty of Jews who made peace with life outside of Jerusalem. They may have anticipated and longed for a day when the Messiah comes and things are set right and Jerusalem is set free, but that's not what drives them. What drives them is what they have, which is Torah, How can we faithfully live out Torah in contextually appropriate ways now that we're not in Palestine anymore, now that we don't have the Promised Land, and now that we're in exile? How do we live this out?
Yeah.
And so this book is, a clear way of expressing some of the values that the Jewish people held.
Yep.
Yeah, it's very Jeremiah 29-ish. Like, settle down and like make the most of it because you're going to be here.
Yeah, be given in marriage.
Yeah.
Find places to live.
Yep.
Plant farms.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good call.
All right. Well, thank you for joining this episode of the After Class podcast. After Class because
The best conversations happen.
After class.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the After Class podcast. ACP is hosted by Sam Long, John Nugent, and Ron Peters. Audio production is provided by Drew Nyquist. Social media is managed by Darren Harris.